Welcome to In the News for March the 24th, 2023. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson at iPhone JDE. Hello, Brett. You look a little different today.
I am a little different. In fact, I am, if you can't tell, this may be like the first for recording a podcast, Jeff. I am in the car. We are maybe about an hour and a half south of Little Rock, Arkansas. We're on the way to drive to visit family in Texas today. So hopefully everything stays normal and consistent as we are on the, I'm on using my hotspot. But anyway, it's kind of fun that I can use all this technology even when we're in the car. So
can we just
hopefully
clarify
everything goes okay.
For any law enforcement that are listening, you are not driving.
Yes.
Your wife is actually
Correct.
driving.
Thank you. My wife, in fact, the wife and the kids are here. They all say hello. But we're having a good time. I'm like, I can't not record because there's always good stuff going on. And in fact, I think we talked about this exactly a month ago on February 24th, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff, that we were anticipating the release of iOS 16.4 and iPadOS 16.4. I know we joke about this a little bit that, one of the things that most people are looking forward to is more emojis. There's a few more things that are coming out with 16.4, but that's really the big story. That's going to be coming out maybe in the next week or so, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah. One of the things that's changed in recent years is, years and years ago, we had more and more features that would come out when iOS 12, iOS 13, when the big numbers came out. But I've noticed in the last couple of years now, although we still get big things on the initial releases, the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 updates tend to be even more important than they were in the past. So, we're always interested to look for one of those. And iOS 16.4 has been in beta for a while now. But the thing that was significant that happened this week is Apple released to the developers, people that write apps and stuff like that, what they call the release candidate. And when the release candidate comes out, this is the final chance for developers to say, hey, I see a real issue here. And almost every single time that Apple releases a release candidate, the very next week, they release the final version. So that's why I fully expect on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday of next week, probably Tuesday, we are going to see iOS 16.4. And so what does that mean? As you said, when the preview came out a month ago, we saw that there were some new emoji coming out. There's one new face, the sort of a shaking face emoji. There's some animals like a donkey and a moose. We talked about the fact that there's a hand that's sort of, you can have one hand come in from here and one hand come in from here, and maybe put another icon in the middle if they're holding a lightning ball or holding a basketball or whatever you want them to hold. So the new emojis will be interesting. We'll be seeing that next week. But there's other features too that are coming out, little tips and features. And I mean, just like one minor one, for example, is that you
little
can
nuggets.
It's for a long time now, you've been able to take a website and put like an icon of that website on your home screen. And so it's almost like it's an app, but it's not really an app. It's a website. Of course, so many websites.
Oh, yes. I used to do that a lot. Yeah.
But now you're going to be able to have notification for those sorts of things as well. So they're even more like a real app. I thought another interesting change is that Apple, since close to the beginning of the COVID outbreak, has had the notifications feature that you can tell if your iPhone was close to somebody else's iPhone that had COVID. We're sort of, COVID is coming down in all the states in the United States, Apple is now allowing health authorities to remove themselves from that service. So maybe we'll have less of those COVID notifications. So interesting stuff. Also some new features for people that have the iPhone Pencil on the brand new iPad. So not the one that I have, but if you have a brand new iPad, then if you get a pencil close enough to the screen, there's a hover feature so that before you even touch the screen, you can do some things. Well, in 16.4, that's even more powerful because if I understand correctly, in addition to just the iPad sensing when your pencil is close to the screen, it can sense when you're turning like at an angle, and it can show different things on the screen. So hover is actually a pretty cool feature that I frankly wish that I had, not so much that it's worth me spending $1,000 on a new iPad, but I do look for, one day I will have a new iPad and I look forward to using that hover feature.
Yeah, now remind me, because I know we talked about this just a little bit, but it is like the brand new iPad, right? I think mine is maybe a 2020 or maybe an early 2021, Jeff. But it looks like here in this story that you linked to from 9 to 5 Mac, you got to have the iPad Pro 11-inch 4th generation and the iPad Pro 12.9-inch 6th generation. I can't remember when that 6th generation was released. Was that 2022 or
Yeah, that
What
was in
exactly?
2022. That was in October of 2022. So unless you have gotten one in the last couple of months, and if you have, you're in good shape. But if you didn't get it for Christmas or Hanukkah last year, you probably don't have the new one.
Another new feature that you linked to, Jeff, was iOS 16.4. It's called voice isolation for cellular calls. And I think this was a really interesting story. We already had this capability with something like FaceTime calls, I think, but now this voice isolation feature is coming to cellular calls as well. That'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been a trick for a while that if you were ever talking to somebody on the phone and you noticed that you had a little trouble hearing them or they had a little trouble hearing you, a good circumvention is to not use a cell phone to talk to someone else's iPhone, but to use FaceTime audio. And if you use FaceTime audio, you don't have to see their face, they don't have to see your face. So it's just like a regular audio call, but you're using, the internet for the audio. And not only was that good because it avoids a shaky cell situation, but it's also good because Apple applied some of its magic to improve the signal, to reduce background noises so that it would focus more on the person's voice and less on what's going on around them. And so now Apple has taken that same approach and they're bringing it to regular old cell phone calls. Now you'll still have the potential problem with cell phone calls that if you're in a situation where your cell phone signal is not very good, for example, someone like you, Brett, who's driving around the country right now might be getting better or worse as you drive around. But at least it's making, it's doing something to bring up the quality of cell phone calls to make them a little bit closer to FaceTime audio. I will emphasize again, though, that if you're geeky enough to think about it and you have an option when you're talking to somebody else for an audio call, I would choose FaceTime audio if you can, because it really is better quality than cell phone calls.
We talked about the Apple Pencil, and just to give you a quick little plug on your Mastodon channel, Jeff, the Apple Pencil, I saw you post on this because I do follow you on Mastodon, and I actually have my own Mastodon account as well. But the Apple Pencil 2, when it came out, it is still full price at like apple.com, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff, $129. But if you have been following Jeff Richardson on Mastodon, and I don't even know, how do you say it? At Jeff Richardson at mastodon.social.
I guess,
if you have been following Jeff, you will know that you could have picked up an Apple Pencil 2 for only $90. Unfortunately, that price is now expired, it looks like.
Yeah, and last night at midnight, Brett, it was still at $89, and not until you clicked it just now, just a few hours later, it's back up to $122.
Yep.
Keep that in mind, though.
There you go.
If you have the lesson is if you have an iPad but don't yet have an Apple Pencil, but you're thinking of getting it, I would not pay full price because Apple does, actually, I don't know if it's Apple or if it's independent. Third parties like Amazon, you can get a substantial discount of like $30, $40 on an Apple Pencil, and I would get it. That reminds me, another one that we see often is if you're looking to get new Apple AirTags, and if you don't have an emergency need for it, Apple will typically charge Apple typically charges $100 for a 4-pack, but I regularly see them on Amazon for $80, and every 5 to 6 months I see it for $75, which is only a $5 difference. But if you're looking to get a 4-pack of AirPods and they're not currently selling for $80, if you can wait a month or two and be paid, and you don't mind paying attention to it and doing the homework, you can often get them for $80 instead of $100 on Amazon.
We've talked about sometimes upgrading your iPhone and your iPad every few years, or frankly, even your computers. I think you just have a brand new computer at work, and typically that the going wisdom has always been maybe like 3 to 4 years, right? You should always upgrade your computer 3 to 4 years. Now I know on Macs, I usually go a little bit longer, but I had never thought about this story that you linked to today, Jeff, about maybe every 3 to 4 years or 3 to 5 years, thinking about upgrading your Wi-Fi router. But I got to tell you, now that I've read this and I've thought about it, I probably have upgraded mine maybe every 4 years or so. And I see a pretty substantial upgrade on that, either from a speed aspect or just an accessibility aspect. Great story that you linked to today.
Yeah, I thought it was a good story too, because I don't normally think about upgrading my Wi-Fi. I did it right around the beginning of the pandemic, but it had been a very long time since I did it before. The Wi-Fi in your home or maybe even your business is something that you pay for it and that you don't really pay much attention to it unless something goes wrong. But the reality is that the technologies do improve over the years. And I think I remarked that mine is about 2 or 3 years. Mine's almost 3 years old now, and I still feel like it's pretty good. But I do know, and now part of that's because when I got my, I have an Eero Pro, I got a more expensive, like a nicer Wi-Fi router. The Eero Pro is more expensive than the regular price Eero and stuff like that. And so because I bought something that was a little bit more expensive and a little bit nicer, I think it's going to have a little bit more lasting power. But already a number of things have changed since the one that I use, and give it a couple of more. So if, I think 3 years is a little fast unless you have a really cheap router. But I will tell you, if it has been 5 years since you last updated whatever you use for Wi-Fi in your home, whether it's something that you got for free from your cable provider or something that you paid for separately, you should at least be thinking about an upgrade, because you might actually notice some real new features with it, and real speed increases. So, but again, I thought, like you, Brett, this was an interesting article to me because it's not something I really think about. You think about getting a new computer, you think about other stuff, but I don't think about upgrading Wi-Fi. But it's not a bad suggestion.
Even on the computer side, a lot of times we have updates, right? And a lot of these updates or these security patches have a lot of security fixes in them, right? And that's what we were just talking about, upgrading to iOS 16.4. And on your computer, you upgrade your computer to Windows 10 to 11. Or, on the Mac side, we even have security patches, and Windows usually every week has some kind of security patches. And the thing that I'm getting to here is on most Wi-Fi routers, Jeff, you do have the ability to do what we call upgrade the firmware, which I got to tell you, just because, and I'm sure you do the same thing, because we've been doing this for a long time, we know that there is a special, IP address that you can go to on your home router, right? And you can go into a place where there's a button that says firmware update. Sometimes you have to download that little firmware update separately from the manufacturer's website, and then you go into this very special page accessing your Wi-Fi router through your browser and then upload that. I mean, you can already tell it's just so complicated. I'm comfortable doing that because I've been doing it for so long. But Jeff, there's no way that I can explain that a lot of times to some people that, they just get a buy a Linksys router and they get it out of the box and they plug it in, right? And they're good to go. The point getting to here is, if you're not comfortable doing those firmware updates, which I don't think most people are, then this is another angle where I thought this story was great. It's like, hey, if you're not going to do that every few years, then maybe you should consider upgrading that router. And it's just something we don't think about, right? We put it in a corner, upstairs or downstairs and just we see the lights flashing. We only think about it when it goes out, in a storm or something like that. But I just thought this was really good, and it's good from the security standpoint as well.
It's one of the reasons that I've been happy with the Eero brand, which is owned by Amazon now, is Eero, I think, is really one of the most Apple-like of routers, because they do make things like updating the firmware very, very simple. It's a very clean interface. Routers are definitely something that if you get a cheaper brand, it may functionally work, but when you need to come to do things like upgrading stuff or updating the firmware, you almost need a computer science degree to do it. And so it's ridiculous.
It's a good story, and we'll link to it just so that everybody can read through this here. But I think that your wisdom is the good takeaway, Jeff. If it has been more than 5 years since you have purchased a new Wi-Fi router, it really is something that you should consider doing. And so, anyway, great story on that. We say this, I feel like, all the time. Another week, another story about how AirTags will save somebody. This story has a little bit of a different twist on here. It may be, just in case you're thinking about the possibility of carjacking somebody, you might want to think about, what kind of a car. If you're not comfortable driving stick shift or manual, you might want to think twice about the particular car that you're looking at here. What an interesting story comes out of Chicago this past week.
Stories like this remind me that I have a feeling that many police officers on their first day of training, the first tip that they're probably taught is, fortunately for us, a lot of criminals are dumb, and that's how we're going to get them. And so here's a funny example where somebody tries to steal a car only to discover that it's a stick shift and he can't even drive away with it. But of course, the scary part was
drive it.
He stole the keys from the woman that he was the victim of his crime, and the keys had an AirTag on them, which is something that many of us have. If you use AirTags, I think one of the number one things you think of doing is putting one in your keychain in case you lose your keys in your own house, let alone lose your keys because someone steals them. So this guy, when he runs away from the woman, and I think he jumped on the L to try to escape, because
he sure did. Right.
And hundreds of people around him on the L that have
absolutely.
iPhones on. The police knew exactly where he was, and when he got to the next stop, they arrested him and took him off. So,
Now, Jeff, in the past, we've talked a little bit about electronic doorbells or doorbells, that have a camera in it. I know that you have one. We've talked about yours. I think yours is a Eufy item, but this was a neat story that you posted today. Is the company called Aqara? Aqara? I don't know what this, but it's an interesting little review here from 9 to 5 Mac.
Yeah, the name is Aqara. I think it's pronounced Aqara.
Right.
Aqara.
Okay.
Aqara
We'll go with
has
that.
been they've been one of the companies that has been making smart home technology for a while now. In fact, they're well known for sort of, less expensive little devices that work together, like a sensor for like leaky water. You could put something near like a refrigerator or a freezer so that if it leaks, it'll sense the water and things like that. But this is the first time that Aqara, to my knowledge, maybe they've had one before, but it's the first one that's been on my radar screen to have a video doorbell, because it is the very first one that works with HomeKit. And just to pause on that, I am astonished that we've gone this many years before somebody has made a wireless video doorbell that works with HomeKit. We've had wireless video doorbells in the past, and we've had wired doorbells that work with HomeKit, which is fine if you're putting the doorbell, right next to your front door in a place that the electricians have already put wires. But if you have a situation where the doorbell needs to be, in another location, like at my house, for example, I have a gate in front of my house and it doesn't have the wires to it, so I had to use a wireless doorbell. There was no way to get HomeKit support, which means that when I open up my home app, I can see all of my other video cameras, but not my doorbell. To see my doorbell video camera, I have to go to the special Eufy app to see it. And so Thank goodness Aqara has now come out with a video doorbell that works with HomeKit, so you can see it on your Apple TV, easily. You can see it on your iPhone in the Home app. You can see it on your iPad in the Home app. So I'm glad that we finally have one of these. And the nice thing is that this review that was done by, was it Bradley Chambers, I believe? It's he's been using it for a while, and he says that it works really well. So so that's nice. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting about this wireless doorbell is it relies on batteries. So you have to be literally replacing the batteries, AA batteries, and you can go through
a lot of batteries.
The one that I have, you just remove it. You use like a special little tool to remove it so that a bad guy couldn't like walk by and remove it easily. But you remove it and you plug it into USB and you charge it for a couple of hours and you're good to go.
Oh, okay. So you're rechargeable. Okay.
Yeah, and I prefer rechargeable than to have to put in 6 AA batteries every couple of months. So there's definitely a downside to it. But I'm glad that we at least have a product like this on the market. And I'll mention one last thing too, which is that it works with HomeKit, which is what I've been looking for. But just as importantly, it works with the upcoming Matter standard, which we keep saying is right around the corner now.
Right, I saw that. Right.
This one is a little bit future-proof.
Yeah, and he even says, I didn't think about this because I do not have a smart doorbell yet. But the fact that it's battery powered means that you don't have to get an electrician, right, to run the wires. I think you've mentioned that and talked about it as well. And it's just something that I didn't really think about. But even here, I think they were talking about you just use like a 3M tape, that you can put on there, for example, and put that up. But he did mention the fact that he wished there is an option, to recharge it, just like what it sounds like yours does. But man, 6 AA batteries that he says the downside is you might have to change that every 3 or 4 months. Which is, you can forget about that, I guess, if you're, pretty easily. But anyway, I'm glad you keep up on this because I like hearing about it when you talk about it specifically, that it works with HomeKit and the fact that it may work with the upcoming Matter as well. Good stuff all around on that. So Aqara, keep going, Aqara. And that's right. Go ahead.
For anyone looking to get a video doorbell, they're really nice to have. It's great to see, who's at your door, and it automatically records when somebody presses the button. There's no question having a wired video doorbell is much better. And that's absolutely what you can do if you can do it. But if you don't have the option, then it's nice to have choices like this.
The last story quickly was an interesting video you posted from one of our favorite aspects is Joanna Stern at the Wall Street Journal. And I feel like I've seen some videos like this before, Jeff, where the people go to like an iPhone trade-in warehouse, right? To where like, what happens to the iPhone once you trade it in? But of course, Joanna and the style with all her editors really just, I think, does a good job of explaining like what happens in the whole entire process. I didn't realize how big of a market Yes, she was talking about a 64.5 billion secondhand phone market, and there's like almost 74 million used and refurbished iPhones shipped in North America each year alone. That's pretty incredible. But I thought this video was really neat. I'm glad that you linked to it today.
Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. I mean, all of us have had an old iPhone that we've, either given to someone else, which is a nice way to reuse it, or turned it in to try to get some money for it, or just recycled it. And it was, I've actually never seen a video like this before of showing what happens behind the scenes, the tests that they run, how they clean them, how they get them ready for sale. One of the things that amazed me about the video is it actually is pretty labor intensive what they have to do. And considering that the margins,
I noticed that
the margins are pretty thin. They're paying so much to get a phone, and they're trying to sell it for maybe $50 more. The work that they go in to get that phone ready for resale, especially considering that some of the phones they get, they won't be able to resell because of problems that they find with it. So there's you got to have volume to make a business like this work. But Joanna Stern is one of the top people in her Wall Street Journal staff when it comes to putting together technology videos. And so this was a very slickly produced video. But it's really fascinating to see behind the scenes how this all works.
In the know, Jeff.
In the know.
Since I am traveling, one of the things that I think almost everybody does, in fact, I don't even know if anybody doesn't use their iPhone as an alarm clock when they're traveling. I mean, I've been doing this for years, of course, not just when traveling, but it's almost like my alarm clock anyway. And I got to tell you, there was like once or twice in the last couple of weeks that I've traveled that I set the alarm. Fortunately, I woke up on time, but I didn't hear it. And I dug a little into this rabbit hole a little bit, Jeff, and maybe most people already know this, and I feel like I kind of already knew this, but there are actually two volume controls on the iPhone, and pretty much the same for the iPad, but I really think about it in the iPhone, right? So one is a media volume control, and the media volume control is what we would typically think of like for a phone call or for music or for an app, right? Or for games or anything that we would typically think that we're listening to audio, right? The second volume control, Jeff, is what iPhone calls ringer and alert volume. And basically this controls the sounds for your phone ring, for the ring, any notifications like a text message notification, a system alert, and alarm. Now, does that make sense, Jeff? I mean, maybe you kind of knew this, or most of us knew this, but I'll get to my tip here in just a minute. In the sense that now that I know that there's two volumes, I've noticed this, that if you are on your iPhone and let's say that a phone call comes in, I can use the hardware buttons on the side of the phone to turn the volume up and down, right? And that is usually the typical volume control. But if you're not in a call or you're not listening to music, if you click your volume up and down buttons, you'll notice that the audio doesn't change on the left side, but there is a little notification bar at the top that says ringer, and you're turning up and down the volume on the ringer. Now, the reason that this happens like this is that if you go into your settings app and you go into here, I'm going to pull this up right now, and you go to what it calls sound and haptics now. It's a little bit confusing. And if you look at the very top, toward the top of that page, there is a ringtone and alert volume. And that is actually where you would control the volume for your ringer and alert notifications. But the difference is that right underneath there, Jeff, you probably have this turned on by default, because I do. It's a little option called change with buttons. Using volume buttons on the left side of your phone will either adjust the media volume or it will adjust the ringer and alert volume. And again, to bring this full circle, if you have that turned on, change with buttons, and you turn down the volume because you're listening to music maybe at night, well, you may also be turning down the ringer and alert volume, which means that in the morning, your alarm, you may not hear your alarm because you've actually turned down that volume on that. So I know that's a lot going on, but just so that people understand that if you're using the volume buttons on the side, you may either be turning down or adjusting the volume for the audio volume or the media volume versus the ringer volume. And if you want to, you can go into that settings and you can turn off the toggle of change with buttons. And that way the volume buttons then only control the media volume. And then you would have to go into the settings app every time to control the ringer volume on that. I hope some of that made sense. I know it's a little convoluted, but it really helped me to kind of solidify this idea that there are two different volume controls on the iPhone.
Yeah, it's a good tip. I've always known that there's the two different controls, but I have to admit, I always find myself a little confused on which one I'm adjusting at any one time. And sometimes I feel like I want to be adjusting one,
right, exactly,
I'm adjusting the other. And I'm always afraid, like you say, that I'm going to adjust one, and I ended up changing my alarms. So it's definitely something, you know, it's nice to know where to go in settings to really double check that you're doing things correctly. But from day one, that's always been something that's confusing about the, maybe it's just inherently confusing, but because Apple separates media volume and ring volume. My tip, yes, it's sort of in a similar vein. It's something that you've probably known that you can do, but weren't exactly sure of how to do it. And what this one is if you're ever looking at a list of items, you know, like emails, for example, we all know that you can scroll, you know, use your finger to scroll up and down, and the emails will scroll, and they'll scroll at a certain speed. But if you have a very big list and you want to scroll even more quickly, what you can do is you can use the slider on the side. And the tip that was in the BGR this week that I thought was really helpful is it was a good reminder to me of how you do this. So let's say for example, you're looking at a list of emails. As you start to scroll the list, just moving it the tiniest amount, you're going to see pop up on the right side of the list a little scroll bar. Normally the scroll bar is hidden, but it appears once you start to scroll the list. As soon as you see that scroll bar appear, I've always known that you can move the scroll bar itself, but what I didn't really realize until I saw this this article was what the specific way you want to do it is, you know, quickly hold down on the scroll bar and don't move your finger, but hold it down for about a second. And you'll know that you've held it long enough on an iPhone because you'll get the haptic feedback. Once you have gotten that haptic feedback, that means, now I have the scroll bar on the side. And now I can just move that finger that's holding the scroll bar up and down. And if you're at the top, you'll see the first item in your list. And if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the last item of the list. And because your list of emails might have, you know, 1,000 emails in there or something, by going from the top to the bottom, you scroll much, much, much more quickly than you would scroll just by moving your finger up and down. So whether it's a web page or a list of emails or anything else that has a long list of items, if you want to be a little bit, you know, if you want to be substantially faster in the way that you scroll it, you know, start to scroll a little bit, then put your finger on the scroll bar until you get the haptic feedback, and then you can move it up and down. Now, that is on the iPhone, which works well once you understand what you're doing. The technique on the iPad is similar, but unfortunately, the current generation iPads don't have the haptic feedback like the iPhone does, which makes it a little bit more tricky because you don't 100% know that you've been holding down the scroll bar long enough. So you just have to sort of guess at it. I think I've been holding it down for about a second or so. Now let's see if I can scroll the scroll bar. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I wish it worked a little bit better on the iPad like it does on the iPhone. But this is one of those things that I've always known that you can move that scroll bar up and down, but I had not realized that it's hold it long enough until you get the haptic feedback, and then you can really take advantage of it. And once you become more comfortable with this, it's a great feature. It's just a little bit unclear as to how to use it.
Yeah, I love that because especially like with a very long list of email messages, right? You want to go down to the bottom. And this just reminds me, you know, from almost day one of the neat tips that I always like, if you go all the way down to the bottom of a list, you can always tap the top center of your iPhone screen, right? And that will jump you almost immediately to the very top. Or if I write a long article, something like that. But having both of those tips together, that really helps you to be able to navigate, you know, a page or a screen much, much quicker, which is really neat. Good tip on that. Well, thanks, Jeff. Always great talking with you, sir. Good stuff this week. Not as many news articles, I think, but hey, things are coming, right? We got not only 16.4 coming soon, but we have the summer coming up with the Worldwide Developers Conference. So there'll be some news coming pretty soon. And this is great. And we'll talk with you next week.
Thanks for calling in from the car. Appreciate the mobile reports today.
See you, Brett. Yes, this is on the move. It's like in the news, on the move. All right, great. Thanks again, Jeff. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.